Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer. I'm podcasting from Ma'alot Yomim in Israel. There are few things in life that are as fundamental and as personal as our freedom of choice. This is such a basic human ability that it is difficult to imagine what life would be like without it. We would be glorified robots, going about our lives in a kind of machine-like trance, perhaps believing that we possess some form of free choice, but unsettlingly aware that it was all an illusion. Believe it or not, the current paradigm in much of the scientific world is that this is precisely the situation that we are in. There is no possible means of generating a truly free will choice within the scientific understanding of the world. There is just the physical world and its laws all the way down. There may be some component of randomness at the core, but it certainly bears no resemblance to free choice. The brain is just neurons and chemicals and electrical signals with no room whatsoever for anything resembling good old free will. This looks like the way things are going in the modern scientific world. The very basic experiential feeling of free choice is nothing more than an evolutionarily generated illusion, developed at some point in the distant past to serve some function in our survival. As terrifying and as counterintuitive as this may sound, it is the gospel truth in much of the modern world. This week's Parsha is called Va'era, which means, and he appeared. It is the first significant word in a sentence in which God tells Moshe about appearing to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the biblical past. The thrust of the message is that God appeared to them in one specific divine image, identified by the biblical name El Shaddai, and not through the more familiar image, which we call Hashem, which means the four-letter name indicative of God being the source of all existence. While all this sounds profoundly theological, there was something more down to earth that God wished to convey to Moshe. This was the plan to prepare the way for the great exodus of the Israelites from bondage in Egypt. That plan, of course, was the bringing of the 10 plagues upon Egypt to whittle down the will of the Egyptian oppressors, to force them to let the Israelites go. This entire scheme, of course, is about as biblical as it gets. It comprises some of the best-known scenes in all of human history and forms the core of the Passover Seder, commemorating this very sequence of events. Of the plagues, no less than 7 of the plagues take place in this Parsha. More than anything else, this is the Parsha of the plagues. Almost the entire narrative of the Parsha is taken up by one plague after another. It makes one wonder why all these plagues were really necessary. Couldn't one whopper of a plague right off the bat have done the trick? What was the need of dragging everything out for what is traditionally deemed to be about 1 year's time? The standard answer given explicitly in the Torah is that it was all a stage to display the awesome power of God. Although this answer may not strike a reasonable chord with us today, it does appear clearly in the text. The fairly uniform sequence of events in each of these plagues was that Moshe was first informed about the upcoming plague and told to warn Pharaoh about it, with the usual addendum that the plague is coming because of Pharaoh's refusal to release the Israelites. Not all of them contain this exact formula, but this is the general scheme. In almost each case, there is some reaction on the part of the Egyptian rulers, either claiming that it was no big deal or feigning submission in some way, only to back out when things got back to normal. The plagues, in order of appearance, are water turning into blood, frogs invading, lice, a mixed swarm of animals invading, a classic disease that killed livestock, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and finally the killing of the firstborn. When reading about a year like this going by in the distant past, it perhaps forces us to put our own past year in perspective. It is hard to imagine how we would have gotten through such a year. The Egyptians, surprisingly, managed to get through most of this without conceding to any of the demands of Moshe. There were times when the population was ready to throw in the towel, but Pharaoh himself always managed to stick it out. How did he do it? It turns out that he had some divine assistance to his obstinance. First off, well in advance of the plagues, God told Moshe that Pharaoh would steadfastly refuse to release the Israelites, no matter how harsh the plague. Whether there was any divine manipulation going on most of the time when Pharaoh refused is anybody's guess. What is clear is that in 4 of the plagues, boils, hail, darkness, and firstborn, the Torah explicitly states that it was God who hardened Pharaoh's heart and forced him to refuse. We can only presume that in these cases, Pharaoh would have buckled under and given in, had God not hardened his heart. Again, the reason given is to demonstrate the awesome power of God. To accomplish this, it was necessary to provide Pharaoh with some extra obstinance to withstand the pressure. There is even a verse early on in the Parsha that anticipates all of this. Before any of the plagues had happened, God tells Moshe that precisely this would happen. Quote, "You shall speak all that I command. You and Aaron, your brother, will say it to Pharaoh, and he will send the Israelites from his land. But I will harden the heart of Pharaoh, and thus increase my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh will not listen to you. And then I will place my strength against Egypt and take out my people, the Israelites, from the land of Egypt with great acts of judgment. And Egypt shall know that I am God in my stretching forth my power on Egypt and in taking the Israelites from its midst." There we have it. The Torah makes no attempt to hide any of this. On the contrary, it reveals it all as clear as a bell. What could possibly be the explanation of this strange turn of events? Was God sabotaging the very plan that had been told to Moshe? That certainly seems to be the case. We even know the reason, to, quote, "increase my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt." This seems to be a pretty high price to pay for this minor gain. Couldn't God have just put on a light show or maybe create another star or something? There has to be something else going on here other than this business about God impressing the Egyptians. Perhaps there is. In addition to the run-of-the-mill signs and wonders that come in the forms of plague like hail or darkness or locusts, which, when we really think about it, aren't really all that wondrous. They are basically natural events that are packaged in a form that is a little more extreme than normal. But the bottom line is that a locust is a locust. What additional wonders did God really put on display by throwing in a few extra plagues? Perhaps there is an obvious answer to this question. Perhaps the additional wonder came in the form of restricted free will. Let's review the situation. Pharaoh had gone through 5 plagues and managed to back out each time he partially buckled under. He always found an excuse to not give in to the pressure. He showed that he was pretty good at sticking to his guns. By the 6th plague, he was really ready to cave in. Even though boils don't seem all that drastic, for some reason he just couldn't take it. That was the first one in which the Torah states that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. What did Pharaoh think when that happened? Did he wonder what just went on in his own mind? He was ready to concede, and then he wasn't. What happened? What happened was that God took away his freedom of choice. This perhaps was the greatest miracle of all that in that tumultuous year of plagues. Free will is such a basic fact of our lives that it is impossible to imagine being without it. But there we have it. Pharaoh lost it for that moment, and the rest is history. This is something that we all need to know. It was not only Pharaoh and the Egyptians that needed to know this, but anybody who reads the Bible. God at any time can remove a person's freedom of choice. That power, as great as it is, can be revoked. It is a gift that can be taken away at a moment's notice. Perhaps this shouldn't come as any great surprise. After all, the scientific world claims we never had it to begin with. But for those who don't buy into that, this does come as a bit of a shock. However, when we think about it, we have to wonder if this hidden flash of a miracle is not restricted to fateful moments like those plagues in Egypt. Maybe it goes on a lot more than we are aware of. Maybe it is still going on today, right under our very noses. Maybe we ourselves have been subject to this hidden form of divine intervention. How many times in our lives have we sensed that we are driven to do something against our better judgment? It almost seems like we are not at the helm of our own ship, like some other power is driving us to do whatever it is that we're being driven to do. How many times has social pressure or forgetfulness or just momentary blanking out left us in the hands of some mysterious autopilot at the controls of our mind? All of these very common occurrences could very well be nothing more than the divine power that intervened with Pharaoh, doing the exact same thing to us. This is the true wonder that was on display way back then in Egypt. Freedom of choice is a gift, but it is not always available. As much as we may think that we can call upon it anytime we wish, we may be under the very illusion that scientists claim has always been there. The inner experience of free will is real. It is among the most profound and most human of experiences. That does not mean that we have it anytime we wish. It can vanish in an instant, and we may never know the difference. It may seem like the most natural thing in the world. Perhaps the most important message out of all of this is to truly treasure our freedom of choice as the remarkable gift that it is. Gifts are greater and more appreciated when they have to be earned and grasped. Free will is such a gift. When we sense that it is there, we owe it to ourselves to make full use of it and to earn the right to use it again. It is something we frequently take for granted, but in reality, it may be as fleeting as a dream. Shabbat Shalom.